And you probably didn't hear anything I said in the last 2-3 minutes, but when we get to more of the sexual intercourse stuff, which is in the later part of this chapter, mainly dealing with Hippolyta and Cyrus Gold and Kirky. We're going to mute that out. I'll be able to hear it. You won't. If you want to hear it, you can hear it on YouTube, which it's in its entirety. But we mute it out for Twitch because I'm not sure if it's a TOS violation. It might be a TOS violation, but I'll assume that it is. So let's go ahead and let's start to review.
Cyrus Gold, Kirky said. Her manner was very polite and kind. Where is Aeaea? We asked. Aeaea is a small island off the coast of Greece. Mr. Gold, she said. Kirky stayed in constant motion during the conversation. She was busy preparing some magical ritual. Her workflow had her moving back and forth from table to table and back to her book. What is it that you want with me?
Now, from a writer point of view, which is the point of this workshop, that's why we keep stopping it, is what was going on here in the scene with Kirky, and her name is actually pronounced Kirkia, Kirky, not Cersei, but we needed to show that Kirky was really a happy person. She's not upset. Normally when you see Kirky, especially in DC Universe, if that's where you're familiar, she plays this angry woman, and she's actually a very kind, in our story, she's a very kind person. She's just, in a lot of ways, she's essentially, her stories put her as the antagonist at a lot of times with Athenata, but in reality, her and Athenata are not enemies in the story. They're actually friendly towards each other, and Athenata has been charged with finding out about Cyrus Gold, and at the same time, she's been charged with finding out about Selene Kyle. And unknown to Athenata at this time is Selene Kyle is Kirky's grandchild in the lore. And if you started reading the lore in book 2, you do not know that Kirky's daughter is Arachnia, and Arachnia's daughter is Selene Kyle, and Selene Kyle is the mother of Selena Kyle, who's going to be Catwoman. But Selene Kyle won't be born until the 1980s, and Selene Kyle is eventually killed by Carmine Falcone. But as far as what's going on in this scene, Kirky has been asked by Vincent Falcone, the senior Falcone, to get this evidence recovered, which Cyrus Gold has helped Hippolyta get out of this club. And so they're trying to avoid prosecution. At this point in the country, this is in 1894. Remember, they're in the story at this point, if you missed the last episode. Wonder Woman, or Athenata, was fighting Solomon Grundy, and when he was basically raping her, her empathy absorbed his life essence, because it's a passive ability. And he didn't know that. And so she's basically absorbed in his mind, and she's living his life through the last 50 years. And at this point of the story, it's the night that this is how he becomes Solomon Grundy. And she's living the experience. And Kirky has been asked to retrieve this evidence, and so she's trying to do it. She doesn't hate the guy. And in the 1890s, Hippolyta was the one who was helping Solomon Wayne, who was helping the Attorney General for the United States, Bonaparte, to at that time in the United States, the federal government was organizing to combat organized crime, which if you follow the battle of the fight at the OK Corral, the cowboys in that were the original, in the United States, the first organized crime organization were the cowboys. So when you hear like a lot of movies where they say cowboys and Indians, a lot of people in modern times interpret that the cowboys were the good guys and the Indians were the bad guys. That's not what that means at all. What it means is cowboys were the criminals in the 19th century. They were the mob, and the Indians were an outside faction. They were basically another country living in the United States. In the Old West, when they were settling these territories, before a lot of these territories became states, a lot of the areas were still nations to the Native Americans. And after the 1850s, right, 1840s, 1850s, it began in President Polk's administration to moving the Native Americans into reservations. And it actually occurs in the Andrew Jackson administration. He's the one that actually moves them off their land, and he's the one that does the Trail of Tears, where he moved everybody out to Oklahoma. A lot of people died, and many of the areas occupied by the Native Americans, which, if you read our 1950 story, the Indians, the Oconee tribe Indians that inhabited that land, they were moved to Oklahoma. And so Hippolyta was helping the Waynes at this time. So Kirky here, it's important to know that she's not upset. She's not under any, like, I must kill these people. She's actually a very comfortable person. She's in good spirits. And she doesn't hate Cyrus Gold. She doesn't hate Hippolyta. She's just trying to do this thing. And one of her things is she turns people into bestiamorphs. So in the lore, when you meet all these like Catwoman, the cheetah, everyone who's been the cheetah other than Priscilla Rich in the story, were all augmented by her Kirky. Priscilla Rich is the only one who's like a natural person as Cheetah, and her problem is that she's psychotic. She has a borderline split personality disorder, and so she has a lot of anxiety where she believes she's like a star and people are out to get her. People are trying to steal from her, steal her stardom, and that's why she sets out trying to essentially rob and steal and injure people, but it's because she's just crazy in one sense. But Kirky is actually in really good spirits. This is what she's doing here. She's moving around. We wanted to show that she was calm and she was very relaxed. And Kirky is a long-term thinking person, although in the story she's a Scorpio. She's a deep planner. She's a water sign. Water signs are deep. They're deep in their emotions and they're deep in their world, and they have a lot of secrets. Scorpios have a lot of secrets. And one of the things they do is they're constantly what they call reborn again. Death and rebirth is a constant occurrence in their lifetime. Kirky and our lore is the same age as Hippolyta, which is 3,500 years old. They're basically each other's antagonist, protagonists in the lore. They're balancing out our stories. Athenada's true nemesis in the story is Kirky's daughter, Arachnia, and Theragonus is her son, who's the male counterpart to Athenada. We haven't seen him. Those two show up in book 3, 4, and 5. You get their backstory in book 5 when we tell the backstory of Athenada, and that you meet them, why they were created. But it's not really explained until Book of Diana why Athenada is so different than the other two, why she's so much more powerful. And one of the reasons why Athenada is not like the other two people is really her personality is what's different. It's no big like magical secret. She's just, her personality is she's not a power-hungry person, and that's really the difference between her and a lot of other people. She's just, it's not something that she's sort of, I need power. She has power, and when we get into the She-Ra stuff, same thing with Adora. Adora really isn't a power-hungry person. She's more of a person who does things out of a sense of duty. And not necessarily a military person, although they both are military people. They're just not power-hungry people, and that's a rare quality. So here we go. Let's continue on with the review.
Miss, we asked. I am sorry, Mr. Gold. Forgive my manners. I am the goddess Kirki. I have been asked to retrieve some information that you possess that Mr. Falcone requires. She said, do you work for Vincent Falcone, Miss Kirki? We asked. Oh, heavens no. Ha ha. She laughed. Mr. Falcone, your employer, requires information to keep him out of prison. You have been reluctant to tell Mr. Falcone what he needs to know. What is your relation with Mr. Falcone? I have known Mr. Falcone for a long time, but I have never met you. Yes, well, I tend to stay here in AEAEA, but Mr. Aries asked me to help Mr. Falcone out with his legal problems. It would seem that you stole some important things from Mr. Falcone, a set of books, and a woman, Margaret Shaw. So what? Are you going to do some hocus-pocus magic on me? Haha, something like that. She paused for a moment, then she walked over to the table. She was dressed in a revealing outfit. Cyrus couldn't stop looking her over. I see that you are pleased by my figure, Mr. Gold. I would be lying if I said no, Miss Kirki.
Right there, we're getting a sense of Kirki's power. Where Athenata has telepathy, and she has a truth vision, sort of her thing, and empathy. Hippolyta has telepathy. Kirki too has telepathy. She can read minds. All the most of all the immortals all have telepathy. It's a common ability they have, but they all have unique abilities and different power, different strength in that power. And Kirki's real power is her gift of foresight, and she's a hell of a sorceress. One of the reasons why she's the dominant as a sorceress is her ability to foresee things. When she crafts her spells, she has the ability to foresee how it's going to turn out and the possible futures of that, and therefore she doesn't make a lot of mistakes when it comes to magic. And her ability to use magic is quite good, mainly because she's lived a long time and she has the ability to maintain control. And this is what her daughter, her granddaughter, not Arachnia, but Celine Kyle hadn't learned yet. And one of the reasons why Solomon Grundy ended up being a zombie and not resurrect. She tried to resurrect him. She tried to right a wrong, and she felt bad for these two people dying. But unknown to Celine Kyle was that Margaret Shaw in the story is a succubus, and she was protected by this demon, her family demon, which Hippolyta figures out in book 3. And that's what Hippolyta is investigating. But unknown to everybody in this lore, Kirki didn't even know, is that Margaret Shaw was tied, her family was under the protection of this demon since the 14th century. And going all the way, their family comes from Ireland, Irish, and all the women in the family were protected by this incubus, and when they die they become succubi to the demon. And one of the things that happens in the lore is they capture Succubi, who's the Amazon queen, and because she's the Amazon queen, her girdle of Gia is tied to all the other Amazon girdles, and because they're all bound by the girdle and the queen is captured, they're all enslaved by the queen. And so what ends up happening in book 3 is after Athenata manages to escape with Selene Kyle, Dr. Psycho, Paula is taken prisoner by the incubi, and she's basically rendered unconscious. And when they take her girl, they render the other Amazons unconscious. So all the Amazons end up basically depowered in the story. And then that's how Dr. Psycho captures Athenata again, sort of a flip. So, aha, we escape, and then, aha, I've captured you. So in book 3, they're all captured at the end of the story. Donna, Drusilla, Athenata, and all they're all captured, and then all the metahumans end up having to go save them. And along with Steve Trevor and Etta, because although she's wearing the Amazon artifacts, she's not an Amazon, and so she's not affected by that. And so Etta ends up saving Donna and Drusilla. And there's a scene at the end of the story where her and Steve are escaping this tower, and it explodes and they fall off this tower, and Etta doesn't really know what she's doing, so she tells Steve, trust me, and she pushes him off this building because there's nowhere to escape. The building's gonna collapse. And they end up falling, and she flips in the air, and her force fields engage around them. Holographic force fields engage, and so when she hits the ground, she hits the hard, and Steve lands on top of her, and she's like, oh, and she didn't know that. And then they end up falling in love at that point because they're high on endorphins. And then the next day, Etta wakes up. She's in massive pain because her body's sore from hitting the ground as hard as she did. But she's not dead, but her body's just in massive pain. Like, I'll never do that again. But her and Steve Trevor end up, it's the first time her and Steve in the story actually like make out as lovers. And that's the moment in the story where Steve Trevor falls in love with Etta. At this point, he's not really in love with her. He's really in love with Diana in book 3, but at the end of book 2, that's where Steve Trevor really realizes that he loves Etta Candy, and he's kind of going to go with it. And because Athenata's good with it already, he goes with it. And they too managed to save Athenata from Dr. Psycho, along with Themis and Deke, and Nemesis, and Hestia end up saving Athenata, and then they all eventually save Hippolyta, and that's how we learn about Margaret Shaw. And then through Selene Kyle, which is the point of my narrative here, was that's how she ends up being redeemed. What had happened was, when she was a 20-year-old girl, she was part of this whole murder thing, and these 2 innocent people ended up getting killed. And well, Selene didn't really know that. But Vincent Falcone changed his mind after they were arrested, so he didn't have a whole lot of time to coordinate this thing. So his posse went out there and they killed the people by accident. And so Vincent Falcone didn't want the people to get killed. He just wanted the evidence and the scare of the people into not prosecuting, but his posse ended up killing the people. And so Selene felt really bad about that over the years, and so she became fixated on resurrecting the people. So when she finally found their gravesite, she tried to resurrect him, but the problem was Margaret Shaw wasn't there. She had already left. And then Cyrus, because she didn't have enough power, energy, the spell, though was successful, it ended up making him basically a zombie, half plant, half man, because he was dead already. So she didn't have enough energy to cast a spell, and he ended up in the state that he was because of Celine Kyle. But the originator of the spell was Kirky, her grandmother. And in this part, he's alive. He's a living person, so it didn't require as much magic to do. And so her spell, you see it, the confident sorcerer could do the spell, whereas later on, the younger spellcaster, she does everything right, but she doesn't realize she's too young to do that kind of spell. She doesn't realize she doesn't have enough power to do it. But that's why her and Kirky in book 3 are talking. Kirky understands why she did it. And then at some point, when way I have it set up right now, I haven't actually committed to writing, but I want Kirky to come to Athenata, and she asked Athenata to be fair to Celine, that she didn't mean for those people to die, and she felt bad about that. And in the story, because Celine and Athenata are both captured by Dr. Cycle, they spend a lot of time together, and that's when Athenata decides not to terminate Celine, because Athenata, in her job, her duty as an angel, archangel, she has the right as an archangel to terminate people's lives out of existence. Part of her sacred athame is that when she stabs you with it, after a nemesis, and all the 4 angels decide what to do, when that blade, it can blink people out of existence, meaning they're forever gone. And so, but for the most part, she doesn't try to kill people. She tries to either restore them and either complete. What ends up happening is that person at that point will be dead, but their body is usually renewed. So they come back in the world as a newborn child, and they restart their lives as a new organism. But them as that person usually ends at that time. But because the philosophy behind that is the person would never really grow if she ends their existence. Her real job isn't to end people's existence. She's not a police officer. Her job is to investigate people's lives and understand what they were doing, and that's why she has a truth vision. It's one of the reasons why she's the only one that has that power. Is her main function in the cosmos is to determine what the person did and why they did it. Did they do it completely out of malice? Did they do it out of free will? What was the reasoning? And she in turn reports that back to the Council of Elders, and they decide what to do with the people. It's a coordinated effort. Anyway, let's get back to the review.
Kirky looked Cyrus Gold up and down with her mesmerizing stare. Her soft hazel eyes complemented her radiant red hair. He was pleased with her 37 to 24. 36 figure. Kirky was just a little taller than Etta Candy at a height of 66 inches tall. I would figure her weight to be around 142 pounds. She had the classic inverted triangle shape, whereas Hippolyta's and my shape were forged from years of exercise. Circe's shape was natural. I would imagine she exercised to maintain the shape. Believe it or not, immortals have to exercise to maintain their body shape. Kirky smiled as she ran her fingers along our sexual organ. Our body had an immediate reaction.
Now here we're showing that Cyrus is a weak man. His weakness is women. And one of the things that got him into trouble with the law was necessarily he was sleeping with prostitutes, but he started taking bribes. And through the bribes, he sort of secured his place at the Iceberg Lounge with the mob run by Vincent Falcone. And it's important to point out that the mob isn't like this big order. There are small groups of crime organizations in different towns and different cities, and some of them are large, some of them are small. in the larger world, Vincent Falcone is one of the large international mob lords. So he's well known, and his real boss is Ray Al Ghul, who's the sort of like the secret organization called the Triumvirate, not Triumvirate, but what is it? Trifecta. And they're the organization trying to bring Trigon into the plane of Earth, plane of man. When Prometheus makes a pact with Zeus and sacrifices his body, and his body is placed in the orb of Prometheus, which is the headpiece for the Holy Grail, a cup of Christ in our lore. By moving humans into their own realm, they open themselves up to demons being able to enter the world. As because they have free will. And by having free will, they have the ability to choose to follow any demon they want, right? Or any angel or deity that they want or not want. That's why how we explain atheism exists in the world, because humans have free will. And by giving free will, that's why they only live for about 100 years. It's one of the sacrifices they make, which keeps the universe in balance. But Cyrus's problem is he's a weak man. And here's Cersei, a really attractive woman. She's having fun with Cyrus. She can read his mind. And she knows that he's a weak man, and she's having fun with it. She likes sex too. So I thought it'd be fun to give, because it's the first time we're really meeting Kirky in the story, that I wanted her to have fun in this story, and I wanted her to have a cool time. I didn't want her to be mean. I wanted her to be a likable person, and kind of a lovable person too, and that's where we're at.
To the sensation, Cyrus was not lying to Hippolyta when he told her that women were his weakness. I could feel our heart beat faster as anxiety crept its way into the moment. My, you are a sensitive man, Mr. Gold. I can see why Hippolyta loves you. Kirky said. You know Hippolyta? We asked. Oh yes. Hippolyta and I go back to the old country. You are definitely her type of man, tall and athletic. Kirky continued to rub our cock. Our muscles stiffened up as she played with our nether regions. I was beginning to see how different male and female physiology were, although I have years of experience with the male sensations through my empathy and telepathy, but being a man had some unique qualities that did not really transfer through empathic connections. The internal sensations seemed stronger being the actual person. The combined
Okay, to point out here, if you hadn't seen the part previous to this, this is the last story that we wrote in this style with the sexual intercourse stuff. In every book after this, we didn't write all these sexual things in sort of an anatomical way. Every story after this, they're written in more of a lyrical, musical way. And so there's less emphasis on body parts and anatomically correct statements. Although we try to be as professional as we can, but I feel as a writer that it isn't necessary. It's always stated that when you're writing about sexual intercourse, you don't have to be profane, you don't have to be vulgar, and even in responsible writing, it just has to be enough to get the reader's imagination going. And they say if you do use, use the cock and the vagina, it's okay to use that, but use it sparingly. And in this case, it's the character writing it. The person trapped in this guy's body. So I think in this case it was appropriate for the character to say it. It's not really done in a profane way, and she's not overusing it, and none of the characters in the scene are like mean-spirited. They're actually in pretty good spirits. So but I wanted to point out as a writer that this is the last time we wrote that in this sort of style. So when you read book 1 and book 2, they're written in this sort of style, but from book 3 onward, we completely change that way we write things, especially when we're dealing with the sexual stuff, the sexual intercourse parts of the book.
Perception of Cyrus's mind and my own perception of having Kirky feel me up caused my own spiritual anxieties to stir. It would seem that Hippolyta has put a protection spell on you, Cyrus. I can smell her vaginal juices all over you. I will need to prep you before I can begin the ritual. Kirky said. Ritual? What ritual? We asked. Yes, the protection spell that Hippolyta cast on you is powerful. She must have blessed you during sexual intercourse. To cast my own spell will require intimate contact with the host to be effective.
Now right there, you're sort of getting an explanation for Hippolyta. When she cast the spell on him, remember they were having sexual intercourse, and they weren't having sexual intercourse just for the sake of having it. It's Hippolyta was using that to invoke this spell onto him, which was this protection spell. And a lot of the female sorcerers are females. And in the old world, a lot of spells were cast through sexual intercourse. And so that's sort of appropriate in our story. It's not a far-fetched concept. And true, many of the priestess, including Athenata, when they worked in the old world in the temples, a lot of the men, because they were soldiers and sailors, a lot of women, except for the Amazons, weren't soldiers. They would go to the priestess, and the priestess would bless them, and that's what the blessing was. They would have sex, and the guy would be blessed by the gods or goddess, and in battle, and that's what would happen. Especially a lot of the single guys that didn't have lovers. A lot of them were before the battle, they would be blessed by the priestess, and that way they wouldn't die alone. It's kind of cool in a way, you know, and die lonely. And the priestess would track the guy's experience. In this case, Athenata, the angels are the ones who chronicleize the people's lives that you're charged with. But back in when we see in book 5, when we do Trials of Athena, when she assumes her duty as a priestess in the Temple of Athena in Athens in 850 BCE, one of her duties as a priestess is she has sex with men. She blesses them through sexual intercourse. And one of the reasons why she still works as a prostitute is they end up blessing the people that they meet. She absorbs all their dark energy through sexual intercourse. And this is what Circe is kind of explaining here in the story, is to overcome the spell that Hippolyta has put on her lover. Circe realizes this thing is going to be impossible, but he made a pact with Ares decades ago, and because he did that, that's a way for her to not sort of get rid of the protection spell, but she can kind of complement the spell in a way that it aids she's protecting him, but she can get what she wants out of it because he made a deal with Ares, which under divine law, it's supreme to the spell that Hippolyta. If he hadn't made that deal with Ares, Hippolyta's spell would have protected him. He would not have become Solomon Grundy, or the bestiomorph that Kirky turned him into. But because he made the deal, it resulted in him turning into the beast, the Hulk. But let's keep going.
She said. Kirky turned to call for her assistants. Guards. 2 large men approached the table. Guards, clean the host's body for me while I prepare the spell, she commanded. For the next 15 minutes, The two guards used a soft sponge with a bucket of cold water to clean our body off. The brushing was not kind. We just bared through the pain as the guards took great pleasure in busting our balls with the sponge and the brush. Without removing the ropes binding us to the table, they loosened the ropes enough to turn our body over on the table. Except for the spot where our body had laid on the table, the rest of the table was cold. The sensation of the cold surface and cold air reduced our erection to a non-flattering size. The two guards continued to brush our back with the soap and water. When completed, they hosed us off with more cold water. Once that was completed, they towel dried our back. Then, they rolled us over and dried our anterior side. Surprisingly, the two guards dried the table off too. Excellent bath, my guards. You may go now, Kirky commanded. Kirky walked over to her book and began to write some words on a piece of paper. What are you doing? We asked. All spells require 4 elements to be successful. Those 4 elements are fire, air, water, and earth. The table is earth, the paper and spell is air, the candles are fire, and the pool under the table is water. The moon is full, so it is in the correct alignment, but the sun is in Sagittarius or 24 degrees of Zeus. Kirky said. What does that mean? We asked. For a spell to be successful, it draws spiritual energy from the surrounding celestial bodies. I must calculate the correct moment to cast the spell for maximum effectiveness. Because Hippolyta casted a protection spell on your body, mind, and spirit, I must use a complementary spell to harmonize.
Now, what she's explaining there is actually a true thing. If you study magic through the Wiccan or Wicca, Wiccan is what they call a male witch, and Wicca is a female witch. And in real magic, what they do is they cast these protection spells, and they're basic spells. And one of the rules that they have in magic is they can't use magic for personal gain, or if not, they're visited. It comes back on the spellcaster 3 times over. So, and even Kirky is bound by that law. So she never really uses her magic for personal gain. As you see, she's casting stuff for other people. And so she's very careful in how she uses magic. Hippolyta too. Hippolyta is a sorceress too. She was very careful in the way she utilizes magic in the story. She never really use it for herself. It's always really for other people. But the 4 elements, the spell has to have 4 main elements of fire, earth, air, water, and the stage, as he's put on the pedestal, is earth. The water, which is underneath the table, is stored in the bucket, which is part of the cup, holds the water. And then the censer is basically a device which you pour like a wax candle or heating element, and it heats up and it vaporizes the water, which makes the gas, and that's usually what they call the fire part or spirit. And a wand is essentially just a candle. And so she has all those elements of the spell. And when they're talking about the celestial bodies, all the planets in the solar system all are part of what they call this free energy that's all around. And the Titans know how to access this energy, which is how they utilize magic. And it's only been 1 or 2 humans in the history of modern time. One was Nikola Tesla. He figured out how to access this free energy that's all around, and he's the only one that figured out how to do that. Wave propagation. When you talk about like wave propagation with radio waves, no one really knows how radio waves are propagated. The only person that really figured it out was Nikola Tesla, and he didn't really keep the notes he had on it, or no one has access to. So when I was studying wave propagation in military, it's one of the things that they pointed out about wave theory and wave propagation was that no one really knows. And so he was one of the only people that knew it, and he kind of took that to the grave. And how to acquire free energy from the environment. And so when you see a lot of the spell casting going on in our lore, it's the way it's presented is the way it would be presented for people who actually study real magic and real life. We try to present it in a way that's true, but there are some points that we took liberty on because it's a fictional story, but there are parts of it that is actually true if you study witchcraft or spellcrafting in reality, how it would actually work. So we try to be true to that in our lore.
With her spell to get you to do our bidding. In other words, I cannot break the protection spell, but because you signed a contract with Ares years ago, I can cast a spell to complement the contract. Contract? Cyrus asked. Cyrus Gold's mind drifted back to a time when we were a teenager. It was 1880. Our mother Maggie Gold was dying from consumption. She was placed in a sanatorium in Gotham City. How she contracted the disease is unknown. A stranger came along and offered us a deal. He offered to cure our mother's illness in exchange for a promise to do a favor for him in the future. Unknown to young Cyrus, who was 17 at the time, the stranger was the god Ares. Ares fulfilled his offer and cured our mother's illness. Unfortunately, Maggie was killed several days later when a tornado destroyed our home. That is how we came to know Judge Solomon Wayne. He was the official who settled Maggie's affairs for the state. After learning about young Cyrus Gold's tragedy after Maggie received a clean prognosis from consumption by the local doctors at the sanatorium, Solomon Wayne was so moved by the story, that he took a personal interest in helping us go to college and eventually to law school. Our father, Walter Gold, had died in the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. We were born 3 months.
Now here, where we get the history of Cyrus Gold, you get to learn about his mother and father, and it took a lot to develop that. But his mother died at age 30. He was a young man, teens. His mother died, and his father died in the Battle of Gettysburg, and that's how Cyrus Gold, or Cyrus Wayne, met his father, Walter Gold. Walter Gold was 19 when he died. 19 when he died, and there's no actual picture of him. It's just a hand sketch of him, which I used this photo to simulate. Cyrus Gold has no idea what his father looks like. He never met him. He died when he was a newborn. And his mother only knows, but his mother died. And his mother lived in a sanitarium for a long time because she had tuberculosis, which at that time was known as consumption. It's a respiratory infection. And she eventually dies of that. And Solomon Wayne was the commanding officer for Walter Gold's company in the army, and that's why the state appointed Solomon Wayne to settle their estate. Since he knew the family and they knew who this person was, they felt he was take it more seriously, and he did. And that's how Cyrus Gold ended up going to law school. Solomon Wayne kind of felt bad for this guy, and that's sort of how they became friends in the story. It's through his father. And Solomon Wayne actually knew his father, but he died. He only knew him like a couple of days, but he died really young. Really young. And such a tragedy. And that's where Ares comes along, and we're going to see here how Ares gets involved.
Months later, except for a faded drawing, we have no real memory or image of our father. Walter Gold was only 19 years old when he died. He was a young private who had joined the Army of the Potomac for the state of Maryland. He was in Solomon Gold's brigade that suffered severe casualties during the battle. Maggie Gold was only 19 when Walter died. She raised us with her mother's help until she died at 36 years old. It was understandable why Cyrus made the deal that he did with Aries at the time. The emptiness of never knowing our father, and the long time it takes for consumption to take its toll on our mother was difficult to cope with at 17 years old. Did you forget about the contract you signed with the god Aries? Kirky asked. Truthfully, I did forget about that. After Mom died in the tornado that destroyed our house, I never really had time to think about it, Miss Kirky, he said. Kirky smiled at Cyrus's politeness. I understand that you feel an emotional connection to help your mentor Solomon Wayne with his personal tragedy, and I know that on some level that you care for Hippolyta and Margaret Shaw. You would never betray them being a Scorpio. Scorpios are committed to their spiritual contracts and spiritual policies. So, I am going to do you a favor, Mr. Gold, Kirky said. And, what is this favor? Cyrus asked. All that you have to do is go over and fetch Margaret Shaw and retrieve Mr. Falcone's accounting books that you and your Confederates stole. Once that is done, your contract with Mr. Aries will be fulfilled, Kirky said. And, what if I say no to your proposal? Cyrus asked. Haha, you do not have a choice in the matter, she said. Goddess Kirky raised her hands and began to chant in Greek. She removed her garments until her body was
You have to mute that part out. Poor Diana. She started off the day, she's been raped, she had sex with her mother, now she's having sex with Kirky. She's like, what? What else can go wrong in this day?
Yes, Cyrus Gold, I will release the beast inside you. Then, you will go retrieve Margaret Shaw and those accounting books from Solomon Wayne, she said. Something came over Cyrus Gold. I could feel our mind drifting away from our body. I could feel our body stretching. Then, we transformed into the mindless Hulk, Solomon Grundy. As we transformed into Solomon Grundy, Kirky moved away from us slowly as the metamorphosis continued. Our body continued to grow 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 feet, until finally, it was over. Yes, my pet, now go fetch my items, and don't let anything stand in your way, Kirky commanded. Yes, master, we said, and with that reply, we walked back through the portal that took us back to Gotham City. It was nighttime in Gotham City as we walked out of the door that led to the alley behind the Iceberg Club. There were horses and wagons moving along the street as we traversed quietly along the road. To my surprise, Gotham City had paved streets in 1894. There were no automobiles at the time. The smell of horses permeated the night air along the street. I could tell that we were walking in a northerly direction. Solomon Grundy began to run. Because he was a Class 4 metahuman, he possessed 12 times the attributes of an anatomically modern human or AMH. We could run at a velocity of 960 miles per hour. We covered the distance to Wayne Manor under an hour. Solomon Grundy crashed through the security gates at Wayne Manor. There were no guards stationed at the gates, so our trek to the main house was uneventful. We had reached the main entrance when Solomon Grundy destroyed the door. For some unknown reason, Solomon decided to walk to the room where Margaret Shaw had been staying. Several men tried to intercept us, but they were met with a solid blow to the head. Bodies were sent flying through the air. We could hear gunshots from all directions, but as a Class 4 metahuman, our toughness was greater than that of industrial diamonds. The bullets from the cold firearms had no effect on Solomon Grundy. Solomon had made his way up the stairs into the guest quarters where Margaret Shaw had been sleeping. Her face was full of pure terror as our 12-foot body had crashed through the door of her room. In her shock, Margaret fainted to the ground. We picked her body up off the floor and set her body over our right shoulder like a bath towel. With Margaret Shaw in our possession, we made our way to the den where Solomon Wayne had kept the accounting books. I could see in Solomon Grundy's mind that we knew where the books would be kept. Our journey to the den was a short one. With Solomon Grundy's super speed, there were few people around that could stop us. We kicked in the door to the den. Luckily, the room was not occupied with anyone. In the back of the room was a tall metal safe. We ripped the door off the safe and grabbed the box that contained the accounting books for Vincent Falcone. Lastly, we departed the main house at Wayne Manor. Solomon Grundy had returned to the Iceberg Club basement in under an hour after leaving Wayne Manor. We made our way to Circe's lair and set the body of Margaret Shaw on the work table. We set the books down on the table too. Kirky seemed very pleased with the results. Good boy, Cyrus. Now, stay here, and guard the room. I will be back shortly, she said. Yes, master, we said. Kirky left the room for about 20 minutes. Later, she returned with Vincent Falcone and Theodore Cobblepot. There are the accounting books and the witness that you wanted, Vincent, Kirky said. When Vincent saw Margaret Shaw and the accounting books laying on the work table, he became ecstatic. Good, good. Judge Wayne will have a difficult time making a case without his key witness and chief piece of evidence, Falcone said. Why don't we burn the accounting books and kill the witness, Don Falcone? Cobblepot asked. Because we have to find a way to make Margaret go away and make it look like an accident, or the police will suspect us automatically. As for the books, we still need those because it is the master list of the people who owe me money after that financial fiasco from last year. What about Miss Hippolyta? We have her in the basement. Do we kill her too? Theodore asked. According to Miss Kirky here, she cannot die. I am not sure what we can do with her, Vincent said. That is a challenging problem, Vincent, Kirky said. Hippolyta is no mere mortal. She is the queen of the Amazons. They would raise this place to the ground with their army special forces units if harm were to come to her. Not to mention, you would suffer the wrath of Goddess Athena. You mean, she is the Hippolyta from mythology, Goddess Kirky? Theodore asked. Of course, you fool. Who did you think she was? Kirky asked. Truthfully, I thought that she was just a successful entertainer. Margaret and her made my place a fortune after the Panic of 1893. It pains me to have to hurt them both. If you know what I mean. I know what you mean, Theodore. Those two on stage and in the sack are like magic. But they know too much. And besides, how long do you think it will take Wayne to get the feds down to the club after that beast tore through his house tonight? Vincent asked. I can revert Cyrus back to his
This is the first time in the story we're actually hearing from Vincent Falcone, and sort of introduced him. We've been talking about him, but we haven't actually heard him speak. And so when I was crafting this scene, I had to do it in a way that you could get a lot of economy, but at the same time, we couldn't go too deeply into Vincent Falcone because he has him, Kirky, and he's dating Celine, and they have a much bigger story in the next book, but we only really need to introduce him. But this was it. We were in chapter 11, chapter 12. We had the only time we could really let him have his moments. So when we meet him in this story, he doesn't hate people. He's not a crime boss because he hates people. He's just out of happenstance. He's good at it. And so he was upset that he lost a lot of money, and that's why Joshua Wayne ended up dying. He was upset with Joshua Wayne because Joshua Wayne, he felt, was kind of a Johnny-come-lately kind of guy. He didn't have to work for anything. And he respects Solomon Wayne in a lot of ways. But at the same time, he blamed Joshua Wayne for him losing all his money. And when he lost all that money, he was stuck. And so he took his anger out. He took it out on Joshua Wayne. And so here you have Theodore Cobblepot ask him directly, well, why don't we just kill him? And then he's like, well, we can't just kill him because they're going to know we did it, right? They'll just know we did it. So we have to figure out a way to get rid of these people, but at the same time, make it look like an accident. And so when coming up, you'll see they feel that everything's good, but then the whole thing with Hippolyta happens and she disrupts her plans. So they have to sort of make new plans on the fly. And part of that plan was, in case they're intercepted by the police, these guys were supposed to go ahead and carry out this mission, which Celine Kyle is the one directing all this. But what ends up happening is the guys get overzealous and they kill Cyrus Gold and Margaret Shaw. And so that was kind of an accident. He didn't want that. He didn't want them to be killed. And so, because he's trying to avert a murder charge, and the last thing he wants to do is kill a bunch of people and create a whole nother problem for himself. But that's exactly what happened. And so, and by luck, the people were unfounded. So he got away with murder, but now it's come back to haunt him in book 3. But his gal, Celine, is having second thoughts about that because she felt bad. And then one of the reasons why she wasn't killed is she was dating him. So, and she was the mole inside Cyrus Gold's office, how he was able to keep tabs on Cyrus Gold and find information, which nobody in this story knows at this point until after he's killed. So here we go.
Normal state. After that, his contract with Ares will be fulfilled and he will get his soul back. Kirky said, do it before the police get here and search the place. Vincent said, once the spell is released on Cyrus Gold and you two return back to Gotham City via the portal, I will close the portal to prevent the police from discovering the lair. You will be out of contact with me for a while until things cool down and it is safe to resume operations in Gotham City again. Okay, Goddess Kirky, tell Mr. Ra's al Ghul that he will have to wait on his shipments until the heat cools down here. Vincent said, okay. I will let him know that his shipments of souls will be delayed for some unforeseen time period. I will let Mr. Ares know too. Kirky said. Kirky raised her hands and released Cyrus Gold from the spell. Our nude body collapsed to the floor. The loss of all the spiritual energy took its toll on our body and we were left in a weakened state. Vincent Falcone ordered some minions to carry our limp body and Margaret Shaw's unconscious body through the portal. Once we were all through the magical portal, Kirky said the incantation to close the portal to AEAEA. As the minions reached down to pick our body off the floor, the whole building was rocked by an explosion. The shockwave from the explosion ripped through the basement level of the building. Off in the distance, I could make out the sounds of physical combat. Apparently, Hippolyta had managed to free herself from her fetters and was making an attempt to free Margaret and Cyrus. Hippolyta's journal, December 14, 1894. The following is a report of what occurred in the basement of the
Now here comes the last battle. Here comes Hippolyta. She's our heroine in this 1940 chance for her to be the Wonder Woman of her day. And there were a lot of Wonder Women, but get to hear her side of the story. And our heroine's trapped in the basement. She's tied upside down, basically. She's being depowered by this Omega crystal, and not to mention her bracers are been welded together, which saps her strength. But she's forced to have sex with these three guys, and they are not very bright, and she manages to escape. And this is that part. We're going to mute out the parts where it gets too much for Twitch.
Iceberg Club. I was being held prisoner in the basement of the Iceberg Club after helping Margaret Shaw escape early in the evening. Theodore Cobblepot intercepted Cyrus Gold and I in my apartment on the 4th floor of the building. My arms were bound by a steel chain. The master link of the chain had been welded to the link. The welded link had sapped my Amazon strength from my body. In addition, my captors had placed an Omega diamond next to my body and secured it to the top of the steel spike that was anchored into the concrete floor. The chain that was bound to my bracelets was fastened to the spike. With the Omega diamond and the welded link on my bracelets, I was trapped. Cyrus had been taken to some unknown location while I was unconscious. When I had regained my consciousness from the chloroform, I found myself lying on the concrete floor with my hands bound. Theodore Cobblepot had come into the room and asked me some questions. Naturally, I refused to cooperate.
Now here we get to see, it was in the last part where they were talking, but that was at the very end of her sort of journal. But now we get to hear these two talking, and when you hear Hippolyta and Theodore talking, they're very polite with each other, and they're very cordial, I would say is the right word, very respectful of each other. Paula doesn't hate Theodore. She actually liked Theodore, and Theodore liked her, and she just shows you that Hippolyta is a very likable person. Everybody likes Hippolyta, and not that nobody likes Diana. Everybody likes Diana, but Paula is a very friendly person, and she's very approachable. And one of the things I feel as a writer, which softens the scene for most of the people I think reading it, is that she did that scene with Patrick Wayne early in the story, and she did another scene with Alan Scott. It's the first time we saw her in a sexual way in the story. So you kind of already see that Hippolyta in her normal everyday life has had way more violent sexual acts just in regular sex. So what she's experiencing with these three guys is not out of the ordinary. It's just that she's bound up. But keep in mind, we're writing a story that uses a lot of sexual content, and at this point of the story, we have to let our evil people, our bad guys, be bad guys. And one of the things that they do with the heroines is they rape them in the story. But and that's not to belittle it. When you're using that as a device in a written story, which will eventually be a video, I feel you have to do it with responsibility on some level, because it's a very sensitive topic for some people that have experienced it in some way. It's very sensitive, so you shouldn't do it in a way that's degrading, but at the same time, it has to be entertaining and for our characters and for the people reading it. If you go too soft, I feel it sort of insults the reader, because the reader is expecting something. And this being the last one of the story, it has to carry a lot of weight. But at the same time, the big sexual sort of violent scene had already occurred with the heroine, Athenata, and Solomon Grundy. That was the main one. So this, though it's a big one, it couldn't overshadow what had already occurred. But this is the last one for the story. And so I felt it had to be done in a way that it sort of sold the goods, but it was also done in a way where Hippolyta is kind of trapped, and she can't escape this, and she's going to have to endure it and basically suck it up like Diana did in terms of faith. And in reality, this is a backstory that Hippolyta is telling after Athenata has survived this, because remember, we'll see as she survived it, she goes back and tells Hippolyta about the story. And so when they sit down to write the journal, the chronicle part of it, Hippolyta is reflecting on something that happened 50 years ago. And so through her own diaries. And this was a part of the story that Hippolyta didn't really know, and that Athenata reveals, because a lot of this stuff Hippolyta has forgotten. And so Athenata is really the one that fills in all the story for her. But we needed to show Hippolyta as the Wonder Woman in her own right. We needed to show her as an angel in her own right. And it was a good way to show the difference between Diana, who's an archangel, and Hippolyta is sort of, she's not really an archangel. She's not at the level that Athenata is in terms of power, but Hippolyta is no weakling in our story. She's very powerful as an angel, and we needed to show that. And so this is the chance we get to let Hippolyta show her stuff.
Operate with him. This made Theodore upset. Theodore Cobblepot was not a violent man by nature. Not that he lacked the ability to commit violence, he simply was uncomfortable performing violent acts. However, he was not squeamish about asking other people to commit violence for him. It pains me more than you know, Hippolyta, to have to be put into a position to hurt you. I would be lying if I failed to recognize that Margaret and you are stars here at the club. Theodore said. Thank you, Theodore, I said. It's true, Hippolyta. Between the two of you, you have easily brought in several $1 million for the club in the past year. Your calendars are booked up with clients for the next year. To lose that source of revenue, I think that I have the right to know. Why would you do this to me? His question caused my mind to recall all the events of the past year. I found some amusement in his words. I had felt sorry for his financial hardships. On some level, I pitied Theodore. Are we laying all our cards on the table, Theodore? I asked. Yes, I need to know. I have always respected your honesty, Hippolyta. Margaret and you were special. You two were different. You two had class in a place that had very little class. You two lit up the room and the customers loved that. Why would you throw all that away? He asked. I could feel the sincerity in his voice. Okay, Theodore, I will tell you why. I paused for a moment to organize my thoughts. There is a family out there, at the moment, mourning the loss of a brother, a husband, and an uncle. They require the truth too. Your confederate, Vincent Falcone, hired the man who murdered that man. Margaret Shaw had witnessed the murder and can testify to the facts in the case. I have a higher duty to help them find closure and to find peace. I said. I can respect that, Hippolyta. I really can. You are so noble and so virtuous. You would come here and risk so much, endure so much, for so very little. You are like no woman that I have ever met, not the common whore that you pretend to be. Goddess Kirky has told me so little about you. She only told me to use chloroform to subdue you, and she told me to...
Now there, when he's throwing out terms, your whore, the common whore, and when she says it too in the next book, I'll be your whore tonight. In their time period, they're using it in sort of a loose, descriptive way. They're not like, oh, you whore. They're kind of being funny about it, and she's okay with it. She's all right. She doesn't have a problem being a prostitute. She doesn't see prostitution as this hateful thing. She doesn't believe in like what they call white slavery, where they basically smack the girl in the back of the head and they ship her off to some foreign country and she basically lives the rest of her life as a slave and a concubine. She's not for that kind of prostitution. She's okay with people voluntarily wanting to be prostitutes, and she has no problem teaching people how to be prostitutes and sort of giving them an education. And she sort of sees it as, I'm going to use the term adult entertainment, as some value and merit in it. And at the core of her, she lived in a world where it was an acceptable thing, and then the world changed thousands of years later, and now it's kind of flipped. And she knows at some point in the future it'll flip the other way again, because she's lived through it so many times. She's 3,500 years old in our story. So she's almost 4,000 years old in the story. Athena too, Athena in our story is like 4.5 billion years old. So she's knows that things are going to change. And so for Hippolyta, when she's throwing these terms around, she's not trying to be insulting. She knows what the whore is. And even in that time period when people threw those terms around, it wasn't. Now, I'm not saying there wasn't people using it to insult other people. It's just a term that they used. But for a lot of people, it was more comedical, and it's just they were okay with it. In this case, the two people, they're okay with it. He was the pimp, she was the prostitute, and they were actually really good friends. And he put a lot of, I don't want to say faith, but he was a man going places. He had his he could see the end of the line, and this kind of, I wouldn't say hurt him. I don't think he was destroyed over this, but it started him down a path where he saw merit in what he was doing. And these two women came in and really embraced his organization. They had made it a world-class place. It was booming. And it doesn't boom again until his son takes over the business in the 1940s when the war's going on, and it starts booming again. The place never boomed like that until the 1940s, and it was because of her and Margaret Shaw. They were there. They were just really good spirited people, and that spirit was infectious, and so it made for a good time. And he was actually concerned about that on a business level. And I guess if you're an employer on some level, even a pimp at some point, he has to care about the people. I mean, nowadays, when you see a lot of pimps portrayed on television or in movies, they're sort of there's no likability of them. They're always like smacking the women around and stuff like that. And I don't think it's always that true. I think there are people that do it, but for the most part, I don't think it's their relationship was actually pretty good in our story. So just continue.
To weld your bracelets together. She even gave me this spike with this strange diamond on top of it. She never explained why, he said. Theodore motioned his head to the other men in the room. In all, there were 3 men. I was never told their names. 2 of the men walked to either side of my nude body and grabbed onto my ankles. The man on the left grabbed my left ankle, and the man on the right grabbed my right ankle. Together, the 2 men lifted my body up by the ankles. They lifted my ankles up so that I was inverted with my head towards the ground. Using some rope, each man tied off my ankles to a nearby pipe in the ceiling. My legs were tied off so that my legs...
Now here, as the sexual stuff is starting, the violent part of it is starting, one of the reasons why, from a writing perspective, why we didn't have Patrick Wayne suspend Hippolyta. They talked about it, but Patrick forgot about it in the story. He was kind of happy. One of the reasons why we didn't do it was we didn't want to take away from the scene. If you had seen it before in the story, chances were it would desensitize you to it later on. And so we needed to have this scene have more impact. So it was only necessary before that they talked about it to sell it. And then, so now when you really see it, I think it has a greater impact from a writer point of view. And it sells the scene, I think. And but it doesn't go overboard in the scene. It doesn't overdo the scene. And then because in this scene, our heroine has to escape. But at the same time, she's roughed over pretty well. She's exhausted after this, and she's they don't smack her around, but they sort of really work her over, these 3 guys, and because she's weakened. And we needed to show what would happen if you weaken the Amazon. But what is untold in this story is that if they were to knock her unconscious, even if she's being affected by the Omega crystal, her body would resort back to its Titan sort of form, and she could end up killing one of those guys because she's 15 times stronger than regular anatomically modern human. So, and her spiritual mass is massive compared to these. Even in a depower state, she's 15 times massive to these guys. So what you see here early on is she decides to go through with this. And the reason why she goes through with it is in the event that she underestimated these guys' abilities, and if they were to successfully sodomize her, she could be enslaved by these three guys. And she didn't want that to happen because she's the queen of the Amazons. If she gets enslaved, then the rest of the Amazons will be enslaved. So she doesn't want that. She has a greater responsibility, even though she's here for Solomon Wayne. We needed to show that she's in danger and sort of she's in this predicament, but she's not so much in danger. She's not in a life-threatening situation going on, but there's tension going on here, and she has to go through this scene to get away. It's part of how she escapes. And then so we sort of, to sell the scene, I figured we let the three guys have their moment, these three underlings, but they do something stupid in the scene, which underlings usually do. And she takes advantage of that situation. And they end up releasing her berserker mode. And in this lore, what we're saying with when the Amazons go into berserker mode, they go into their banshee mode. And this is why when Athenata merges with Roxy, Roxy, when her body was retrograde, she was a banshee. That's her spirit form. And when the women, the Amazon women, angelical ones, are deprived of their bodies, or somehow their body is malfunctioning, their spirit form takes over, which is why on some level, if they're taken enslaved, if the guy goes too far or enrages the Amazon at some point, they'll go into banshee mode and just kill that guy, which is by law, the nature, what they're supposed to. At that point, the probability that the guy won't be killed is low. They have no control, they have no free will at that point. Nature takes over. They're like a plant at that point, a Venus flytrap. They're just going to kill the guy and be done with it. And so, but Amazons, because they're angelical, they try to avoid that at all costs because they don't want to kill. Their sole purpose in life is to prolong life because they're all tied to the spirit of life, which in our story, Diana is the tree of life. Spirit, the Holy Spirit, the tree of not all the feminine angels are part of that tree, part of that spirit. And so
legs were spread in a V shape. Once they were done tying my ankles to the steel pipe, my body was left there dangling from the ceiling. My arms fell to either side of my head, but they did not touch the floor. My spine had stretched out towards the ground from the inversion. I would estimate that my hands were about 3 feet from the floor. As my height is 5 feet 9 inches, I would estimate the ceiling in the room was about 10 feet from floor to ceiling. My hands were bound together by the chain fetters. I know that interrogating you, Hippolyta, will probably prove to be pointless, but I have a reputation to maintain. Don Falcone expects me to torture you, so I brought my most trusted enforcers to work you over for me. I know that you like rough sex and that this will probably not hurt you as it would traumatize other women, but I think you would agree that this is better than the boys using you as a punching bag. The boys are going to keep you entertained for the next hour while Mr. Gold goes and brings Margaret Shaw back. I will be back.
Right there, you're seeing, on some level, Theodore cares for the girls. He doesn't really want to smack a woman around. And that's sort of the mentality people had in the 19th century. Not that people weren't against smacking women around, but for the most part, they didn't. And you see that in his character. He doesn't want to smack her around. So he thinks that by humiliating her sexually, these guys, it'll be the next best thing than smacking her around. And so that's what he decides to do. But you also see that he's not bashful about having other people do it. Even though it hurts his feeling, he's not bashful. And it's like she said earlier, he wasn't beyond telling other people to do it. He just didn't like violence on a lot of levels. But he had to, because he's the pimp in the story. So
back at that time in the case that Mr. Gold is not successful, perhaps by then, you will feel like talking to me. Theodore Cobblepot had left the room. He left
Here's
me there
where
in the
she,
room with the three men. In that moment, I
decides
decided to
go
endure
through
the
it.
sexual intercourse that the men were going to put me through. If I resisted and failed, then I would become a slave to one of these three men. I could not risk that. It was better for me to embrace my problem and face it with courage. I had to put my faith in Goddess Athena to get me through the next hour. If I was going to save Cyrus and Margaret, then I would have to have patience and wait for a moment to strike. Well, boys, who's first? I asked. The three men began their assault on my body. Each of them removed their clothes in front of me. I took some delight as they undressed their bodies in front of me. One of the men walked in front of me and ran his hands down my sides. The sensation made my body hair stand up. Another man took up a position behind my body. He reached around my body and caressed my body from my stomach and down to my breast. The motion caused my breast to firm up. I closed my eyes and took a moment to exhale my breath. Look, she's already excited, the slut. The man from behind said, "We're going to have fun with you tonight, slut." For a long time, I had watched you at the club. I could never afford the price the boss put on you. Now, I am going to enjoy this hour. The second man said. I decided to remain quiet as the men tried to taunt me with their comments. For them, they desired to use fear to intimidate me to gain their power over me. But, I am Amazon. I do not let fear.
I have to mute this part out. Computer can't say AMH.
Man said, "Look at these bracelets, they look like gold or platinum. I wonder if they are worth anything. We should keep them as a souvenir. I am sure the boss would not mind." As I laid on the ground, my body was tired from the hour-long sexual experience in my weakened state. The men decided to take my bracelets as a souvenir or a trophy from the occasion. "No, don't take my bracelets off," I yelled. The men ignored my cry and just laughed at me. That proved to be their undoing, for when they removed my bracelets, the symbol of our Amazon bondage from all those years ago, they triggered my berserker state. The instant my arms were free from the bracelets, that triggered a blinding white light. After the light, there was an explosion of energy. My body erupted with the violent release of my spiritual energy as it ripped through the basement with an enormous shockwave. The explosion was not the combustible kind that is used in bombs or mortars. It was just a violent expansion of spiritual energy that rocked the foundations of the building. My body transformed from my normal size to my true Titan size. In our berserker mode, we Amazons had no mental control of our body. Without control, my body acted out of instinct. In my Titan form, my attributes were times that of Amha. In this pure form of being, my spiritual mass was 1.46 x 1041 pounds, and my spiritual energy was 4.73 x 1051 joules. This increased my strength so that I was capable of lifting up to 1.7082 x 1043 pounds of mass. That means that I was capable of lifting 8.541 x 1039 tons of mass. The only problem now was that I had no mental control of my body. My body would now instinctively seek out and destroy what was threatening me. My pure feral animal was now released. My instincts wanted to kill these three men and there was no way for me to stop it. In my rage, I had picked the spike off of the ground and smashed the head of the spike in the ground. This destroyed the Omega Diamond by shattering it into dust. I hurled the spike at the first man. The blow made contact with his head and killed the man.
Now what happened there is she's in spirit form now, so when they go to spirit form and are in their true Titan size, they're no longer affected by these things that affect her bodies, the Omega crystals and stuff. Like Athenata, when she's in her spirit form, in her evanescence form, when she's merged with Roxy, she's no longer affected by those things. And like the bracelets being bound there, she's not affected by that because she's not tied to her body anymore. And so a lot of the weaknesses that they have are tied to their earthly body. Now, one thing that Athenata can do, and a lot of the other Amazons can do too, is when they're interacting with normal people, they're in these regular female-sized body, but when they go to their true Titan form, they're like Godzilla size. People, they're like huge Titans, and they're massive, and they don't do that normally because it's hard to walk around a town incognito when you're a big huge monster size being walking around, so that wouldn't be appropriate for them, but they're capable of doing that. And when we get into the later lore in the 2016 stuff where they're battling these big huge monster sized creatures, they'll do that more. And when she goes to Apocalypse, fights Apocalypse, they're in her Titan size form. So that's one of the first times we're going to get to see it in the lore. The Titans in their true size. And then in the initial fight, Athenata loses. But it's not like she's smacked down. And it's a really dragged out fight. And she only loses mainly because she's already tired. And she's been transported to another universe. And she's being infected by the Omega energy from the Apocalypse, and plus Darkseid has those Omega beams, which he can for the Omega crystals to affect the Titans, they have to be tuned to a particular frequency. One of the abilities that Darkseid has is he can mentally tune his Omega beams to those frequencies. But it's hard to do because each Titan has a different frequency, and it's a huge frequency range. But Athenata and when she fights Darkseid the first time, she's already being weakened by the background radiation from the omega crystals, which are all over Apocalypse, which Apocalypse is the future Earth, millions of years in the future, and where there's no sun anymore, and the radiation comes from the omega crystals, and that's how she actually loses. But in the battle, he ends up raping her in the battle, show his domination, but that proves to be his undoing, because in doing so, he now exposes himself to her in a way where her passive empathy takes over, where she didn't really have a control over that, and she almost kills him. He realizes that, and when they're having their intercourse, because he has those, not really a gauntlet, but how he uses his mega beams is through his suit that he built, and it's tied to the orbs, because he impregnated when he enslaves all the other Titans, he puts them into the orbs like Prometheus was, and that's how he can use their abilities. And what happens when he mates with Athenata is her power absorbs all that, and it ends up destroying a lot of the orbs, and it almost kills him. And that's why he pushes her away, and that's why he beats her down. He ends up beating her down because he needs to delay her, and it's the first time people have seen him weakened. No, at that point, no one had ever seen him weakened. He almost died, and so he has to get rid of her, and that's why he throws her down the abyss. But he knows it's only for a short time. He knows she's going to recover, but when he rapes her in the story, she learns all about him at that. So like she learned with Solomon Grundy, she lives his whole entire life at that point, and that's when they fight the second time. That's how she knows how to defeat him, and he reveals all his secrets to her, and that's how he ends up dying or being defeated. But in this story, this is what happens to Hippolyta. She doesn't have a truth vision, but they release her Banshee mode here, and she goes in and she starts to kill these guys. What's going on? And here's an illustration of what it's going to look like in the 3D lore.
Man instantly. I hurled my body at the second man. I grabbed his body and snapped his neck instantly. I tossed his deceased body aside. The third man tried to run away, but my super speed overtook him. I used my leg to kick at his chest. The blow crushed in his chest and killed him. He too had died instantly. I grabbed my bracelets and tore the steel link off of them, which separated them into two parts. Instinctively, I ran towards the glass window. My body smashed through the glass and shattered it into many pieces. Many men tried to rush to my position, but that decision proved to be unwise. I immediately attacked the men. Using my hands, legs, and body, I attacked everyone who crossed my path. No minion were spared from my wrath. In time, I managed to get my bracelets put back onto my forearms. With my body, mind, and soul together again and in full control of my body, I set out to find Cyrus Gold. Eventually, I came to a place in the basement where Cyrus Gold was at. He was there with Margaret Shaw. Cyrus was still nude. Next to Cyrus and Margaret was Vincent Falcone. He was carrying a box of accounting books, which I had immediately recognized as the accounting books that I had stolen earlier. I made a quick motion to arrest Vincent Falcone by giving him a swift backhand. His body had collapsed onto the floor from the attack. Theodore Cobblepot was cowering down in the corner. Apparently, when he saw me bust through the door and violently attack Vincent Falcone, he gave up. I am not sure about how much time had gone by, but Solomon Wayne had arrived on the scene with the police. The police had arrested all the people in the building, except for Margaret, Cyrus, and me. In the whole altercation, I had forgotten that I was still completely nude when the police arrived to conduct their investigation. One of the officers was kind enough to find me a robe to wear. For the next couple of hours, we all spent the time answering the questions for the officers' police reports. Diana's journey.
Okay, so that ends chapter 11. We're in chapter 12, which is the last chapter, which is short. Only really two, Diana's and Edda's journals. But in that last part there, again, we're being exposed to that the Amazons are very comfortable in their nudity. They're not like sometimes when you read fan fiction lore when you're dealing with the Amazons, Wonder Woman Predator, like the guy gets some nude and like, oh my god, I'm naked, yay. And then I don't think that they would be that way. I think in the culture they were from, it's like whatever. I don't think they see themselves, especially if they live for 1,000 years. I don't care if they're naked, nude, doesn't bother them. And then so a lot of times they have to be mentioned. People have to point out, oh, you're naked. And so when Dottie West experiences this with Athenata in book 20, Athenata is not really thinking about it until people talk about it. And then Alfred or Manfred, when he runs into her at the gravesite, he's like, oh, by the way, he puts a coat on her. And she's like, okay. And that's sort of what we're showing there, is that the Amazons are comfortable in their nudity, comfortable in their own body. They're not shy or ashamed of who they are. And they're not ashamed that they work as prostitutes and stuff. And that's sort of part of their duty in the lore. And so they're not bashful and they're not ashamed. They're not apologetic, but they like to be kind. Women, and that's their function in cosmology.
Journal December 14, 1894. It was shortly after 11 o'clock in the evening. We had just returned from Wayne Manor with Margaret Shaw and the accounting books for Vincent Falcone's criminal operations. After meeting with Vincent Falcone and Theodore Cobblepot in AEAE.
Oh, so here we're finally gonna hear from Margaret. She's got a small role in this book, but in the next two books she becomes more important in the story. And she was Hippolyta Zedekiandi in the story, and one of the reasons why Hippolyta likes Zedekiandi is she reminds her of Margaret. And so when we casted Margaret, we had to find a young actress that was as good quality as Bo Derek when she was in her 20s. I think Bo Derek is a really good actress. All the films I've ever seen her in, she's always been really good. And I think she's a much better actress than what a lot of the material she was in was written for. And I think you see it in a lot of her later stuff, the acting quality. It's kind of like Marilyn Monroe. If you really see her in a lot of movies, especially watch it later on when people don't know who she is, you really see her talent come through as an actress. And here it's Hunter Haley. She's from Young and the Restless. She plays Summer, and we use what's her name? Michelle Stafford is playing Nemesis and Themis, which are twin sisters. And so we casted Gina Tononi. They played Phyllis in Young and the Restless, and Hunter Haley there, she's the daughter of that character in Young and the Restless. That's who I know her from. But she's been in a lot of stuff recently, a lot of good material, and she's actually a much better actress than what you see her with in Young and the Restless. And I think part of what gives her character a bad rap in Young and the Restless is the writing. Not saying that the writing's not good, it's just they don't write the material well for her and the range of the actress. And so I felt she would be good for that role of the look anyway. And she's not actually in the story. The actress isn't actually working for us, but I think she has the look I wanted for Margaret Shaw. And young 20-year-old girl. And she's very warm, very likable. And she's a dancer. She's got a dancer body. And when we see her later on in her succubi form, I think it works out I think she has Irish look to her. I don't know if she actually is Irish, but her she has some Irish in her. It's kind of like when you look at Adrian Palicki. She has some Greek in her. You see it in her look. I don't know if she actually is Greek, but you see it in her hereditary look. She spits the look you wanted, and I think Hunter sort of fits that too. For Margaret Shaw. Margaret Shaw is actually from California, but her family immigrated from Ireland and they settled in San Francisco. And her backstory is that she ran away from her family, and she basically ran away on a ship, stowaway, and she ended up in Gotham City, which is where the ship went. That's how she ended up in Gotham on the other side of the United States. And but unknown to Margaret is her family history of the succubus. She didn't know the guy her mother was living with was incubus, and that her family, all the women in the family, are cursed. And so we learn about that later on in book 3 and 4. But here's our chance to finally get to meet Margaret Shaw in the story.
With the goddess Kirki, she transformed our body back to Cyrus Gold's normal state. In our weakened form, we had been carried through the portal back to Gotham City in the state of Maryland, as a precaution to avoid being discovered by the police, who would surely be on their way to search the Iceberg Club with Judge Solomon Wayne. Kirki had closed the magical portal to AEAEA, Greece. Now, our nude body laid on the concrete floor of the basement level of the Iceberg Club. This section of the club was mainly used to store supplies to run the hotel and restaurant. Our attention had been disturbed when a loud explosion occurred nearby in another section of the floor. In our weakened state, we could hear the sounds of gunshots and glass breaking. The sounds of human bodies being tossed around emanated throughout the floor. The sounds seemed to be getting louder, as if whoever or whatever was making the noise was coming our way. The door to our room disintegrated into dust as Hippolyta came crashing through the door. She was completely nude and massive in size. Apparently, someone had triggered her Amazon berserker state. Hippolyta would never willingly remove her Amazon bracelets. After our many years of bondage to Heracles and to his warriors in Themyscira, and after we liberated ourselves from slavery to men, Goddess Athena decreed that we would forever wear our bracelets as a symbol of our bondage. If removed from our arms, we would revert to our wild feral state and destroy those who would oppress us. While in the berserker state, Hippolyta was transformed into a wild beast. Long wild hair and fierce red eyes demonstrated the clear signs that Hippolyta was out for the bloodlust. As Hippolyta came into the room and her eyes fell upon Cyrus Gold and Margaret Shaw, she managed to gain some focus and clarity. She was able to put her bracelets back on and revert back to her normal state of homeostasis. Before Vincent Falcone and Theodore Cobblepot could escape the room, Hippolyta knocked them both out with a solid blow to the back of their heads. Once the two men were subdued, Hippolyta took a moment to rest and to think. While she laid there on the ground, the police with Solomon Wayne arrived and arrested anyone and everyone they could except for Hippolyta, Margaret, and Cyrus. Hippolyta, are you all right? Solomon Wayne asked. Yes, Solomon, I am fine, Hippolyta said.
Here too is the only time that we hear from Solomon Wayne, so we had to write him a pretty good bunch of lines. He only had a quick moment to do it, so we had to really do a lot in this scene with Solomon and Margaret and Celine Kyle. And the story is coming to an end, so we have to tie up all these plots that we started in beginning in chapter 1. So we're slowly wrapping everything up, and we put Raymond Burr as Solomon Wayne. He's one of the ancestors of Bruce Wayne, the key ancestor. He's the one that makes it all happen. One of the reasons why their family started being lawyers. He's the one who builds all the sexual rooms in all the lower part of the manor. He's the one who converts the bunkers over to that. And he's the one that really makes Wayne Enterprises. Back then, it was a Wayne Consolidation and Consignments, sort of the mega company that it is. They were already a world-known company, but he really brings it into their own. And it's not till Elizabeth Wayne comes along that sort of brings Wayne Enterprises into the modern era that Bruce Wayne eventually inherits. It's why they're a worldwide dominating company. It's really because of the work of Solomon and Elizabeth Wayne and the family. And later on, when Diana meets Bruce Wayne at the hospital after his parents are shot, this is setting up that story, is what's happening here.
On our way here, we heard a loud explosion from outside of the hotel. With haste, we entered the building fearing the worst. Solomon said, "How did you know to find us here?" Hippolyta asked. "We were able to track the large creature that attacked Wayne Manor tonight to the Iceberg Club. He left massive footprints leading to the club." Solomon said. "Creature?" Hippolyta asked. "Yes. He was a big huge thing. He must have been 12 feet tall or so, completely naked. He attacked Wayne Manor about an hour or so ago. For a large fellow, he could move at a great velocity. He was able to cover the distance from Wayne Manor to the Iceberg Club in under an hour. We had to ride our horses at breakneck speed just to get here as fast as we could ride." Solomon said. "Was anyone hurt?" Hippolyta asked. "Yes. Several of my house staff and some ranch hands were injured when the beast had stormed the property and kidnapped Margaret and made off with my legal evidence. I reasoned that they would come here first." Solomon said. "I am sorry to hear that, Solomon. I was hoping to avoid any casualties." Hippolyta said. As the two were talking, a uniformed police officer handed Hippolyta and Cyrus a robe. "Thank you, officer. I had forgotten that I was naked," Hippolyta said. The officer smiled and went about his investigative work. "Well, counselor, you have had quite a night," Solomon said. "Yes, I hope that we were successful after all this effort," Cyrus said. "Me too. Once the police wrap up here, I have arranged for your secretary Miss Kyle to take Miss Shaw and Mr. Gold home for the night. I have a coach outside with a team of horses at the ready." "Thank you, Solomon," Cyrus said. Hippolyta walked over to Margaret Shaw and hugged her. "How are you, Margaret?" Hippolyta asked. "I am shaken up some, but I will be okay once I find a bath. The big brute carried me all the way over here on his back," Margaret said. "Solomon has a coach waiting for you and Cyrus. You will be staying at Wayne Manor tonight once the police finish up here. I hope that you will still testify about the murder of Joshua Wayne," Hippolyta said. "Don't you worry about that, Hippolyta. I wouldn't miss it for anything short of death." After some time, I would estimate about 2 hours, the police managed to have the situation sorted out. Margaret and Cyrus stepped into the coach that Solomon Wayne had acquired on short notice by a local company. In the coach was young Saline Kyle. She was Cyrus Gold's secretary at the time. Unknown to anyone at the time, Saline Kyle was secretly working for Vincent Falcone. I could only watch as Cyrus put his faith and trust into Saline Kyle. When I had met her earlier tonight as Diana Prince, my telepathy had been blocked by the soul stones placed around the Iceberg Club in 1943. Although Athena had mentioned Saline Kyle, it had not occurred to me that she was older than she appeared. I was not ready to appreciate the reality that Mother had known Saline all those years ago in 1894. After discussing the details with Hippolyta as we compiled this report, Hippolyta theorized that Saline had...
Now, right there where she says Diana's talking inside Cyrus's mind. I could only watch as Cyrus put his faith and trust in Celine. When I met her early tonight as Diana Prince, my telepathy had been blocked by the soul stones placed around the Iceberg Club in 1943. Although Athena had mentioned Saline Kyle, it had not occurred to me that she was older than she appeared. I was not ready to appreciate the reality. That's giving us insight in that even though Diana has a truth vision and she feels and she can recall and learn things, unless she's really focused and thinking about it, the information just doesn't come to her in like this grandiose, so here it is sort of form. she has to put it all together in her mind. And so when she's getting all this information, there's a lot of it coming into her. And as she thinks about it and has become more cognitive of things, that's when she gets a deeper understanding of the reality, the truth. She has to sort of be thinking about it. She has to, in psychology, that's the difference between attention and non-attention. Memory. People can memorize, but sometimes, I'm going to use the word forget things. It's not that you lose the memory in your head, it's that you're not paying attention. You're not consciously or cognitively aware of what's going on. Even though you might be scanning things, she has to be aware of things. And her mind is a part of that. So if her mind is on other things, that is what can blind her to the truth. And so like Athenata doesn't know she has an older sister, and how she doesn't extrapolate this information from Hippolyta, and I think one, they're blocking that information, and two, she's not really thinking about it. She doesn't know she has an older sister, so she wouldn't really even be thinking about it, and it wouldn't even cross her mind, and she's not second guessing it. So that's how the older Titans are able to blind her to things, is she doesn't really know. And so because she wasn't alive in that period, she won't really know. But if she thinks about it for a long period of time, or she becomes aware of certain things, which she's slowly becoming aware of her sister through her relation with Roxy, and also what's happening in the lore unknown to Athenata and Hippolyta is the actual older sister is entombed in this prison, and she's buried in this prison, and the only way she can escape the prison is through her astral projection. And in the early 2,000 years that she's been alive, she's been learning to use this ability. And then when we get into the 1950s and 60s, she gets to the ability. Right now she can only wander out, but she can't communicate beyond her body. She learns the ability, or gains the ability, to communicate with Athenata in the story through Roxy. And through the time Athenata is going through the stuff with her daughter, that's when her sister starts becoming more prevalent in her mind, and that's when she starts becoming aware of it. But she doesn't become aware of it like right away. It's she's basically hearing a voice in her head, but she doesn't understand who the person. She starts to think that maybe she has, kind of going crazy because she's in the middle of a depression right now. So she's hearing these other voices in her head, which is her oldest sister communicating with her, and it's sort of what we're explaining here in this scene.
Had been a minion of Kirk all those years ago. She was very clever at hiding her true allegiance to Vincent Falcone from Cyrus Gold for many years. We never suspected her of any villainy. That proved to be our fatal mistake. It is a painful reminder that even with telepathy, empathy, and a truth vision, we were not all-knowing. On the way to Wayne Manor from Gotham City, we had to pass through Slaughter Swamp. In 1894, it was the fastest route to Wayne Manor, which paralleled the railway lines heading north from the city. As we rode inside the coach, Margaret had dozed off from the long horse ride in the coach. Before we were able to understand what was truly transpiring at the moment in the coach, it was too late. Just shortly after 3 o'clock in the morning, as we passed through the heart of Slaughter Swamp, the coach came to a stop. Several men approached the coach on horseback. They were armed with repeating rifles. The men seized Margaret Shaw and us at once. Margaret Shaw's fate was swift. The men tossed her body on the ground and ended her life with one shot to the heart. Before we could react to the incident, we were met with gunshots. The bullets pierced our body in multiple areas of our body. All of them were fatal shots. Cyrus died instantly. The men tossed our bodies into wooden coffins that were lead-lined. Where they buried Margaret, I do not know, as my vision was obscured by the coffin. I could hear the sounds of the hammers as they sealed our casket tight. I could hear the sound of the coffin being placed into the ground. 50 years would pass by as we laid in the ground. Hippolyta and Athena reasoned that the protection spell placed on Cyrus Gold by Hippolyta and the bestiamorph spell cast on Cyrus must have preserved his body and spirit. Over the decades, our body rotted in the ground of the swamp, until one day, we were revived by Saline Kyle. It would seem that after Cyrus Gold's and Margaret Shaw's death, Saline had expanded her knowledge of magic and reanimated Solomon Grundy for her own purpose. In time, I relived through the moments when we were sent to attack the 3 trains. I relived the time in the basement when we were ordered to attack Hippolyta and Etta Candy. I relived the time when we had battled Wonder Woman and defeated her. Then, in that moment when Solomon Grundy was raping my body in the street outside of the Iceberg Club, everything went dark. When I regained my awareness, I was inside my own body again. I was still nude and being raped from behind. As I turned and looked behind me, Solomon Grundy had been restored to Cyrus Gold. He was returned to the way he appeared in 1894. He was 32 years old again. When Cyrus Gold became aware of his sexual organ penetrating my body, he stopped and let me go. I fell down before him. He collapsed to his knees in horror and in shock. "How did I get here?" Cyrus asked. "It's a long story, Cyrus, but I will be happy to tell you the details once I recover my energy and strength." Then, I collapsed in front of Cyrus Gold from exhaustion. 3 o'clock in the evening. When I came to, I was in the ship on one of the medical beds. Etta Candy, Steve Trevor, and my mother were there when I recovered. "Is everything okay? How is Cyrus Gold?" I asked. "He is doing fine."
Okay, so here we've connected all the threads. We finally, from the point where they were at the pool party, and just rightly after that, we had sort of the pointer scene, and everybody split off. And then our main group split into 2 parts. And then that sort of came down to just 2 people, which was Athenata and Solomon Grundy. And then so they mated. And then she went inside his mind and she lived to 50 years. And so we, as an audience, we got to experience this. And so the character has lived the entire 50 years of this guy's life. And she's kind of knows what's going on with him. And she realizes that he was kind of a victim in this, but he wasn't completely innocent. But he didn't set out to murder anybody. And as far as she knows, from her perspective and Hippolyta's perspective and Cyrus Gold's perspective, they were betrayed by Saline Kyle. And so this has formulated Athenata's view towards Saline Kyle. So when she meets Saline Kyle later on, I don't want to say it makes her prejudiced towards Saline Kyle. However, she sort of sees Saline Kyle as a cold person, a cold-blooded murderer, and she doesn't see her as, at this point, sympathetic to her. And so when Cersei Kirky comes to Athenata later on and appeals to her, that act, and she talks with Arachnia that night, and it's really with Arachnia that she sort of rethinks her opinion of Saline Kyle. And so in this scene, all our threads are coming together, and so we got everybody together. Here's our cast, and from this point on, we're basically closing out the story as a writer. And remember, we're bridging it to the next book, so we're going to show you how this book ends and the next book starts, but let's kind of get there. We got 45 minutes to do it, so let's do it.
Hippolyta has him in the bedroom resting. "He and you had lost a lot of energy during your battle," Etta Candy said. "I looked down at my arms and my bonds were gone. My chains are gone." "But how?" I asked. "It would appear that Cyrus Gold has released you from your marriage after I told him what had happened to him," Hippolyta said. "And what did happen?" I asked. "I reason that your empathic power restored him to his mortal being somehow." "What do you remember?" Diana? Hippolyta asked. Then, I had told the three the long tale of how I was transformed into the body of Cyrus Gold. They relayed to me that from their viewpoint, I had not gone anywhere. Solomon Grundy had been raping my body from behind when suddenly he transformed into the young 32-year-old man. By the time Hippolyta, Steve, and Etta had worked their way over to me, the two of us had collapsed into a state of unconsciousness. Hippolyta loaded you two into her car and brought you back to the ship for medical treatment. Etta said, "How is Alan?" I asked. "He will be okay. He took a beating by Solomon Grundy in their fight, but with the advanced medical facility on your ship, he will make a speedy recovery," Steve said. After that, we all returned to Wayne Manor for the night. It was after 3 o'clock in the morning when we arrived. I told Etta and Hippolyta that I wanted to sleep later than normal to recover my energy supply. They said that they understood and would pass on the information to Elizabeth when they saw her so that she did not end up working out alone in the morning. Etta and Hippolyta assisted Alan and Cyrus throughout the night. The two men remained on the ship for medical treatment during that time. Steve and I returned to our room where we showered and changed. Then, we turned in for the night.
Okay, so there, it's the end of that, basically our climactical part of the story. It took 3-4 chapters, but we sort of tied it all up. And we have learned as a reader that Athenata can be weakened. She can be rendered unconscious, and she lost a lot of energy in this battle. And what's going to start happening with her over the next few days is the next book, the fundamental idea is we were sort of paralleling with the 12 days of Christmas. And that's why the story is told over a 12-day period of time. But what ended up happening is, as we started writing the book, I realized between book 3 and what then was book 4 that we had to have a book between the two, because there's some days between this book 3 ending and book 4 starting. So we ended up moving what it was book 4 to book 5. That's Trial of Athena. And so we had to write another book between book 3 and book 5. And so book 4 sort of comes along as an accident. And so we have to sort of end book 3 in a way where our heroes are in peril, and then they become unperiled in book 4. So in this scene, we get to really see that she can be weakened. She lost the battle. She didn't die, but she can lose. She can be hurt. And one of the things we're learning in the story is that Athenata hides her pain away from people, and she's not always straightforward with people because of her she's a neurotic in the story, and part of what she does is she internalizes everything. And this is where you're getting to start to see the other characters picking up on it. And okay, what else I wanted to say here? In the last book, the book starts with Steve Trevor, and it ended with Etta Candy. So in this book, since it was just a larger version of the last book, basically, we started the story with Steve, and we wanted to end with Etta, since these three are in a polyamorous relationship. I always felt it's cool that you start with Steve, and Etta's at the end, and Diana's really in the middle of this, between the beginning and the end. She's actually the main character, and I kind of borrow that from reading a lot of Batman lore, and a lot of Batman, at least detective comic versions of Batman, through the 80s. The way they wrote Batman in the story back then was although he's the Laura character, he's never really the main character in the story. He's never the protagonist in the story. Usually the protagonist in the story is Bruce Wayne. And you only really see Batman sometimes in the very beginning of the story, the middle, and the very end of the story. But for the most part, in Detective Comics, it's Bruce Wayne that goes through the entire story. And so when I started designing these stories, that's how I wanted Athenata to be portrayed in the story. I wanted sort of the two other people in the relationship, and then she's sort of in the middle of the story, and then the Wonder Woman part of the story, sort of her job in the story is, you don't really have very many scenes where she's Wonder Woman in the story, but she's always Athenata in the story, and that's how I wanted to portray her in all the lore. And then when we get to book 20, which really begins in book 18. 18, she's sort of stripped away from Wonder Woman. And then when she goes to Apocalypse, she's sort of born again. You see her in her raw Amazon form, and then she merges with this alien. And then through a story of Diana and through the all the way through the 2013 story, you really learn about her more in a slow story. And it's really through the story of her daughter that we learn a lot about Athenata, the character, who she is, what she's about, and we see her as a motherly character, which is really what she is in the story. She's in the Justice Society and eventually the Justice League of America. She has a very motherly quality to her, which is what Steve and Etta sort of like with her. She has this, not that they want to be with their mother, she has this real enduring quality, and that's what Manfred has, and he has a father-like quality that comes out, that's a parental quality that people pick up on. And Hippolyta, in a lot of ways, relies on Athenata, that quality Athenata, because at heart, Hippolyta is really a child, because she's a Leo. But Athenata is a lot more mature than Hippolyta, a lot wiser than Hippolyta is, because she's a Libra, and Libra, where it sits in the zodiac, is a little bit more mature than Leo is. And so she has a wiser view on things. She's not the wisest, but she has a very wise view, a very neutral view on things, and not a very deep view on things. Or she's not attached to things, anchored to things as other people are. But this is the beginning of that end for her.
Etta's Journal, Wednesday, December 15th, 1943. The next day, I was the first to come down for breakfast. Elizabeth and Manfred were downstairs in the dining room setting up the breakfast. I had spent the night and early morning.
Okay, so here we are in chapter 12, and from a writer perspective, this chapter has to lead us to the next story. It has to finish all the loose ends of the story and tell us what's happening with our characters. And then it has to springboard us to the next story. So at this point, the main part of the story is over, and we're sort of reaching the conclusion of that with Cyrus Gold. Well, we don't really know what's happening with him. We don't find that out to the next book, but this has to lead us to that. That book, and I think it does a successful job at that.
Morning on the ship, helping Hippolyta to attend to Cyrus's and Alan's treatment. Hippolyta had sent for a staff of medical personnel from Paradise Island to help assist with the treatment of the two men. Once the staff of medical personnel had arrived via the teleporter on the ship, I decided to return to my room to shower and to change. I looked in on Walter and Paris while I was in my room. The two cats were sleeping when I had returned to the room.
So like always, we bring in the non-human characters, the cats. Remember, we've been following their story throughout. Walter's story began in book 1. It's where we first meet him. Paris was added in as a friend to Walter, and That's Hippolyta's cat, and Walter is Edda's cat. Diana doesn't have a cat, but they hang out a lot with Athenata, and she's likable. And so we needed to tie them up. What's going on with them in the story, and then we sort of bring in Silas Wayne and Patrick Wayne story.
Room. Once my shower had been completed, I had changed into something comfortable to wear for the morning. Then, I walked downstairs to the dining room to see if breakfast was ready. Elizabeth and Manfred were in the room getting the breakfast ready for the morning. "Good morning, Elizabeth and Manfred," I said. "Good morning, Edda." Elizabeth said, "Good morning, Madam Edda." Manfred said, "You seem to be in good spirits this morning, Edda." Elizabeth said, "I am." Despite how the evening started last night, it ended rather well. We stopped Solomon Grundy, discovered the Nazi connection with the Iceberg Club, and saved Cyrus Gold. Well, Diana and Alan did most of the work. I just helped carry their bodies back to the car when it was over. I said, "How is Diana?" Elizabeth asked. Diana was a little sore this morning after her battle with Solomon Grundy, but Steve and her will be down for breakfast as soon as they complete their shower. I saw Hippolyta getting ready. She was looking in on Alan Scott's condition when I talked to her this morning. I said, "I heard the news report on the radio last night about Wonder Woman's battle with Solomon Grundy in front of the Iceberg Club. They did not mention anything about Alan Scott or the Green Lantern in the report." Manfred said, "Green Lantern's battle with Solomon Grundy happened inside the club before the reporters had arrived on scene. Saline Kyle had ordered Solomon Grundy to kill me. Alan jumped in the way to protect Hippolyta and me," I said. As I was describing the scene for Elizabeth and Manfred, Hippolyta came downstairs for breakfast. Like me, Hippolyta was in a good spirit. Despite what had happened last night and early this morning, she had remained strong throughout the whole ordeal. It was inspiring to witness. From her position, she was able to listen to part of the conversation. Yes, Alan suffered some serious injuries. Solomon Grundy had shattered every bone in his body when he attacked Alan. I have Alan in a biotank now. He should be fine once the medical bath heals his body." Hippolyta said, "That is..."
Now here we have a nice young 20-year-old Linda Carter. She's playing Hippolyta. Now remember in our story, Hippolyta only looks like she's 25 in the story, and so does Athenata. They all the angels all look 25 in the story. So we have to really see them in their imagery that they're really young looking and energetic. And so here's Hippolyta's sort of final words in the story. And Elizabeth, 3 women.
"It's good news, Hippolyta," Elizabeth said. "I had a team of medical personnel sent from Paradise Island. They are on the ship attending to Cyrus and Alan. They will be here a couple of days while the 2 men recover." Hippolyta said, "Perhaps we should set out some more plates and make more food for the staff." Elizabeth said, "If it is not any trouble, Elizabeth, I do not want to overwork the kitchen staff at the house." Hippolyta said, "Think nothing of it, Madam Hippolyta. The staff here is ready to serve any and all who visit Wayne Manor." Manfred said, "Thank you, Elizabeth and Manfred." Hippolyta said, as the 3 were talking together, Silas and Patrick came into the dining room for breakfast. The 2 men were in good spirits and were full of energy. "Good morning, Silas and Patrick," I said. "Good morning, Edda," the 2 men replied. "I want to hear all about what happened last night." The radio didn't really give many details from last night's incident at the Iceberg Club. Silas said, "You want to hear everything?" I said, "Of course, don't leave anything out." Silas said, "At that time, I had recalled the entire story of what occurred since our group had left the manor the day before to Elizabeth, Silas, Patrick, and Manfred. The 4 seemed mesmerized by a tale of Green Lantern and Wonder Woman. Hippolyta and I found some joy in talking about our adventures with the group. As we completed the story, Steve and Diana walked into the dining room. "Good morning, everyone," Diana said. "Good morning, Diana and Steve," Elizabeth said. "Edda and Hippolyta were just telling us the story from last night. Your battle with Solomon Grundy was all over the radio last night." Silas said, "Yes, it was an exhausting battle. Solomon Grundy was very strong. It was only by luck that we prevailed." Diana said, "I would subscribe it to fate, Diana." Hippolyta said, "I would subscribe it to faith." Athena said, "All of us turned to see that God is..."
Now here we get to meet Athena, and One of the changes that I have made to book 3 and 4 is I started to have Athena have a big. Once I put Corey Everson in that role, I started designing a bigger role for her in the story. And her and Hermes in the story, I want them to be more active in the story. And Hermes really should be the one sending messages between Athenata and Athena, and Iris, the goddess Iris, not the character Iris for the Flash. But we're going to start seeing Hermes a little bit more in the story. But we get the I couldn't find a photo with Corey Everson in sort of jeans and top, how she's written in this scene. So I had her working out there. Was you see her guns? It's like massive Miss Olympia there. I like her as Athena. I think she's perfect as Athena, and I think her hair is right for the character, and she looks right for the character.
Athena had appeared to us this morning. Diana and Hippolyta bowed before Athena. The rest of us were not really sure what to do. Athena was dressed in a casual style of jeans and a blouse. She was very beautiful. My goddess, what is your command? Diana said, please, you do me honor. Sit and have breakfast. I will join you this morning. Athena said, Goddess Athena, let me introduce you to Elizabeth, Silas, Patrick, and Manfred. And of course, you already know Etta and Steve. Hippolyta said, thank you all. The honor is mine. Athena said, you were mentioning about faith, Athena. Diana said, oh yes, it was faith that got you through last night, Diana, and not fate. It was your faith that had remained when all your other powers and gifts were overcome by Solomon Grundy, but through your faith and your love that your empathy restored Cyrus Gold's life. It was your faith that redeemed him when all hope was lost. It is through true faith that we as people learn to trust in other people. Without faith, we can never rise to the level of trust. It was your faith in me that gave you the trust to endure, and with that faith, you found the courage to learn the truth. Athena said, as always, Goddess Athena, your wisdom is inspiring. Hippolyta said, we still have Saline Kyle to redeem. She will be harder to deal with than Cyrus Gold. Her true nature is deeper than Cyrus Gold's true nature. Diana said, and what of Margaret Shaw? Is she lost from history for all time? Athena, Hippolyta asked.
Okay, right there with Hippolyta, that begins Hippolyta's story, which we pick up in the next book, but it started right here. Hippolyta, after she heard Athenata's version of the story, she becomes very concerned about Margaret Shaw. And in the very beginning of the next book, where they visit the site where she's executed, and Hippolyta sees it, she didn't know that happened to her. She suspected that she had been killed, but she didn't know. And when she had hoped that it hadn't happened, but when they realized the body isn't there, that's when she became concerned. And so this is why she ends up going to see Hades, and she goes through this basically orgy. And to find out, because she needs to get access to the World Library that Hades is a part of. One of the things that happens, because all over the universe you have these people who chronicle all these lives, and the angels, one of their duties is to record the lives of their charges and the people they come into contact with. And all that information is stored in what's called the World Library, which Hades is the keeper of this library of all knowledge and secrets are stored in there. And Athenata, by the nature of what she does and her abilities, she's sort of tied to this library through her own mental abilities, and so is Hades. So when Hippolyta in the next book goes to try to get information from this library, she's not privileged to that information, even though she has telepathy. She has to give something of equal value to get that information. That's why she ends up doing this orgy stuff for Hades, not because he's a cruel man. It's that she needs to give up something as important to get something that she wants. And her and Hades have this nice talk after she goes through it that he wanted to point out to her that her desire to find out what's happening to her friend is blinding her, making her reckless to things, and she needs to slow down and realize what's going on. And she didn't listen. And she ends up captured by this succubi. And it's really through her own negligence, but she wants to find out what happened to this girl because she feels responsible, and she becomes obsessive about this, and her obsession makes her do crazy stuff. And that's sort of what Hades points out, that your desire to help this girl goes beyond just the love, it goes beyond everything else. And your willingness to go through this orgy was telling. And so this is the beginning of that story here, and it begins in this chapter. So.
Her story is not complete. She still has a story to tell to us. In time, her story will reveal itself. Athena said, I know where Margaret Shaw is or was. In my time as Cyrus Gold, I witnessed the execution of Margaret and Cyrus at Slaughter Swamp. I will relocate that place. Diana said, what happened to Colonel Helmut Stryker and Saline Kyle? I asked. They had managed to slip away during the battle in front of the club, but with the evidence we collected from the club last night, we might have disrupted their long-term plans for the moment. We will have to keep an eye out for them. Steve said, I am sure that General Blankenship and Colonel Darnell will be concerned about their whereabouts. Diana said, I am sure that they will. Diana. Steve said, Elizabeth and I will be going to look at an old property she was talking to me about yesterday afternoon. Hippolyta said, property? I asked. Yes, the old brownstone property. It is an old estate that I acquired.
And so here we tie up the final thread of the story. Remember back in chapter 1, the 3 people were sitting there, they were making out on the bed, but prior to that, they were talking about that their place is too small, and that perhaps they need a bigger bed because the tub they have is only built for one person. They need a tub for like 3-4 people, and they can't just go in and remodel this. I mean, they could remodel the apartment, but it would be too expensive, not for them, but for the size of the apartment, it just wouldn't be worth it. So Paula decided to buy them a Christmas gift, and she had been talking with Elizabeth the last couple of days, talking about how the 3 needed a new place, and Elizabeth has this property she's been sitting on, which is her old family estate, the Soder family estate, which in our story becomes the building for the Brownstone estate, which becomes the headquarters for the Justice Society of America, which is in the Syria, we're developing the Justice Society of America. And that's how the Brownstone state is acquired. I always thought it would be cool if in the lore that house belonged to Diana Prince, Wonder Woman. It was her house. That's why everybody ended up living there. And one of the sad things of we're trying to set up as a writer for book 20 is that when she finally comes home to her house, and once you read all the books that lead up to it, it's clearly established that is her house. But when she comes back from Apocalypse, she doesn't feel welcome there anymore. And it's kind of sad to think for the character that not welcome her. She feels that she wouldn't be welcome there, and it's really in her head. She doesn't want to hurt everybody, and part of her neurotic nature is she internalizes that she's going to crush all these people, and she doesn't want to do that, and so she goes on and decides to live in Athens, Georgia. And when Hippolyta reconnects with her later on in that book, Hippolyta decides that she's going to make everything right. She decides in her own mind, Hippolyta, that she has to make things right. And that begins her character's journey back to this house that Hippolyta buys for her. And I think the setup for that story begins here in this story. And it began in chapter 1 with these people basically needed a bigger house, and Hippolyta decided to buy them a house. And I always thought it would be cool if that's how that property came about. They didn't buy it for to be this grand headquarters or grand estate. They bought it because they just needed a bigger place to live. And through circumstances, Athenata just kind of grows away from the house out of just circumstances. But when she reconnects with the Justice League of America, I thought it would be cool that part of that journey is for her to return back to her house. And I thought it would be cool if people had been living in the house for 20 years, never realized that it was her home. But it's not true. They would know it was her home because they built a monument to her in that house, and there's a big portrait of her in the house because they all thought she was dead for 10 years. At least before she returns back to the house, they think she's been dead. And so her returning back to the house, I think, is that we need to make it a bigger deal. And part of what that is her maternal relation to all the other characters is sort of what her true power is in the story, which she's doesn't realize yet. Her true gift is her ability to inspire other people and bring people together and nurture people and grow. So in our story, she's sort of the Professor X character in the story. She's the one who's sort of gets people to accept that they're metahumans. She sort of gets people to accept that even if they're not metahumans, they can make a difference in the world, and they just need to learn skills and how to do things in a professional way. She's sort of that character in the story that in a way Steve Trevor is the same type of character, but his character goes dark for a while until he reconnects with Athenata in the story. And then in the story, they never reconnect again after they break up initially. They never reconnect again. And one of the reasons why is Steve got married and he had children in the story, and Athenata ended up having a daughter, which was Steve's daughter, and she didn't want to push him into anything. And so that's sort of why they never get back together in the story, and why Helen in the story sort of has them reconnect in the story, because she eventually in the story thinks that their sort of relation was stolen, robbed, and she wants to make it right in the story, but it never is, never does. And it's sort of one of those things that they miss their moment and it's forever lost. One of the tragedies in the story is they never reconnect in the story. And that's why. And I thought it would be cool to the history of the Brownstone estate that it's her house in the story. It's her home, and I thought it would be cool.
Long ago, but never knew what to do with it. Hippolyta was telling me about how you three needed a larger place to stay. The Brownstone property is closer to Washington, D.C. than it is from Gotham City, but it is located in Gotham County. Elizabeth said, I was thinking of purchasing the property from Elizabeth as a Christmas gift to you all. Hippolyta said, really? That is a surprise, Mother. Diana said, we can all go look at the place this afternoon if you are up to it. Elizabeth said, of course, we will go look at the property. Diana said, does this mean that we are going to be neighbors now? I asked. It certainly looks like that now. Elizabeth said, after breakfast, we all went to look at the brownstone property. Goddess Athena had returned to her home in Athens. Steve had managed to get a 2-week holiday pass for Diana and himself for the holiday season. We all spent the holiday season at Wayne Manor with the Wayne family. It was a very merry time for all of us. In a couple of days, Alan Scott was back to his normal self and enjoyed the season's festivity. For Cyrus Gold, it would be a long road of recovery for him, but for all our efforts and labors, he had been redeemed.
End of report. Wonder Woman.
So here we get to see the Marston family. Remember William Marston? He lived in a polyamorous relationship with his wife Elizabeth and Olive Byrne, and so we included them in the family. And we also included our DC Universe Online family. We're all part of the DC Universe Online family. I figured if we're writing a fan fiction about the story, you should include all that in there. It's probably a good omen. And the 53 is how many plates we had to make for this section. And here we finally get to meet everybody. The creator
Was created by William Moulton Marston and is the inventor of the polygraph. He wrote Wonder Woman using the pen name Charles Moulton. Wonder Woman and Green Lantern are the properties of DC Comics.
That's what we should acknowledge, and that's the end of Road to Redemption. Pretty much it ends Cyrus Gold's story. And then that's the end of the story.
Swimming was one of the many joys in the world that...
Okay, so when we pick up book 3, let's go back. I was listening to it the other day, but let's rewind. Be kind and rewind. So now this is how book 3 starts. We're just going to play a little bit so you see how they connect from a writer point of view.
Steve Trevor's Journal, Wednesday, December 15, 1943, 12 o'clock in the afternoon. The details of this journal will recount the events of the past few days as I had remembered them. This journal is one piece of several that will contribute to the larger mosaic of the report. The events in this entire report.
So you see, book 3 starts immediately after book 2 ends. See, book 2 ends, they went off to do this, and then in book 3, they start right in the car. So there's not a whole lot of changeover. So chapter 1 in book 3 has to recap what happened in book 2 for the people that didn't read the book. And so chapter 12 in the last book has to end in a way that, in case no one goes on to read any of the other books, you have to close everything up. And so we had to do a quick recap on what happened to Alan, what happens to people in the later week, but for the people who go on reading the series, we find out what happens, because the 12 days to Christmas leading up to it, and then the days between Christmas and the time where they meet up in the beginning of the book 5. It's a long time. So you have the 12 days of Christmas, and then about another week and a half between that and the next book. So it's a lot of time to tell a story. So a lot happens in the month of December and January in 1943. And a lot that happens to our main character, Diana Prince. So here we are. We've already reviewed this book, so we're not going to spend it. I just want to show how it connected from a writer point of view. And that pretty much is how book 3 starts. And if you're interested in listening to that, you can go to our YouTube page here and get that. Go ahead, and we're going to load up our Nightbot playlist, because we're getting ready to start the intermission in about 10 minutes. Play this. So we're going to go ahead and end the clip there. We'll come back, we'll do the intermission. Put this to here. And then we'll be back at 1800. Let me go ahead and bring up the screen. Okay, so we'll be right back.